Hello. For my data story assignment, I chose a very interesting question. Do penalties affect scoring in NFL games? So, at first, I didn't know or really care. I was just kind of looking through data. But eventually, I did come up across some pretty compelling stuff that, while not earth shattering, is still very interesting to look at. So, I asked, what's the most important part of watching a sport? The loud crowds, the obnoxious, pale announcers, or it's the food that's making New Year's resolutions harder to follow. Wrong. It's the fans. The sheer amount of excuses every year over what causes teams misfortunes is mind numbing. Every year, more people come up with excuses for why their teams aren't doing well. There have been countless debates over family gatherings on what is the true cause. Is it the offensive coordinator? Is it Uber Eats? Is it the ads? Nobody seems to know. I wish to squash this once and for all. And it doesn't matter if you're a huge fan or just want to point to something and say, shut it. I got the facts, and I want to prove to that know it all family member that I know something about sports they don't. So, all jokes aside, why this question? Do penalties affect scoring? Long story short, I found really cool correlations in data. I found this data partly from NFL Savant, open source, debatably accurate data. We would call this toy data of fans basically collecting data over time because the NFL keeps the real data to themselves. I started by just displaying penalties in 2024. I didn't have a real goal in mind. I just wanted to see, hey, what are the penalties for each team in just this year? As you can see, there are some gaps and it's not entirely clear on what's going on. So I tried to put in a different year, 2023. Similar results, but I started to notice something. I started to notice, oh, these squiggly lines are starting to look a little similar. So I dug deeper. I was at a crossroads. I wanted to know them. I said I wanted to know what can I gather out of this data. So I decided to prune the data. I decided to find a way to get readable results. So I decided, okay, I'm going to take the last 10 years of Super Bowl teams and only analyze the penalties for those teams. And I did 10 years because that was the amount of time and data that I had to work with. I had 10 years worth of CSV files for this penalty data. So I wanted to ask, can I draw meaningful conclusions? And especially since these are from the best of the best teams, maybe something interesting could come out of it. So I compiled the last 10 years of data for these penalties. Then I parsed it for only the main Super Bowl teams. And what I found was pretty interesting. I found that some teams were more consistent than others, and that in fact you could sort of see some kind of a story out of this information. You can see what teams are really consistent, what aren't, what are the amount of penalties these teams are getting. But I had to dig deeper. This on its own wasn't saying a whole lot. So I wanted to find a new data set to help with my search. So I looked for scoring data. I said, all right, if these teams have trackable penalties, maybe scoring has anything to do with it. So I found this GitHub of, again, more toy data that is more or less accurate to what the actual data says. And I did the same process. I took all 10 years of data, parsed it through for only these Super Bowl teams, and I found this. At first glance, it looks like a whole lot of gibberish. But if you look deeper and you compare it to the other data I just showed, you actually see an interesting correlation. So, what I found was if you put these charts together, you actually sort of see that as penalties go up for these teams, so does their scoring. And I found this very interesting. This was crazy to me, right? Why would penalties influence scoring? How is it possible that I can just one to one show that yes, more penalties means more scoring, at least over the last 10 years for Super Bowl teams? Not to be a buzzkill, but this isn't scientific conclusions. This is purely non scientific. In the end, I did putting these side to side, I did see that if you actually look one to one for these, barring some outliers, these teams are following a general pattern of the higher their penalties, the higher their scores. It is pure correlation, but you can sort of make the in air quotation marks conclusion from this data. That being said, this is cautionary tale. Correlation does not equal causation. It can never be said too much, but I just found random data off the internet about NFL teams and was able to pretty clearly show a correlation to this data, even if this correlation is complete nonsense. So at the end of the day, I just wanted to use this project as an example of how data can just be used to show anything you want, regardless of your viewpoint. If you want to show that penalties show more scoring, by God, you can do it. Or if you want to do crazier or more potentially damaging things, you can also do it. So at the end of the day, I really enjoyed this project, and I just wanted to show a fun little exploration in the data that I kind of went on over the last week in this project. And I have a Jupyter file with the detailed breakdown with all the code of exactly how I came to these conclusions and more technical insights into what I actually did on the back end for this. Thank you.